It practically reads like a Hollywood movie script. It started over the radio waves and moved into a courtroom. Many are calling it a DUI setup. And tonight, 10 News reporter Andre Sr. has the nitty-gritty details of what may lead to several lawyers being disbarred.
Hey there, Mr. Campbell.
The Florida bar giving a clearer picture of what led to the arrest of Phil Campbell on DUI charges last year, says his attorney.
And it's not a very pretty picture for the lawyers who have been charged.
The players in all of this, Stephen Diaco, Robert Adams and Adam Filthaut, all represented Bubba the Love Sponge and their paralegal Melissa Personia. And then there's the apparent mark, Phil Campbell, who repped Todd, MJ Schnitt. Personius ran into Campbell at Malio's restaurant. Witnesses describe her as, quote, overly flirtatious. The two drink, but she never reveals where she works. Now, at this point, according to the complaint, she is relaying exactly what's happening in the bar to her bosses Robert Adams and Stephen Diaco via text message. Adams, in turn, contacts law partner Adam Filthaut, a personal friend of TPD Sergeant Ray Fernandez. Fernandez allegedly waiting outside Malio's to catch Campbell driving drunk, texting Filthaut, quote, I hope we get him.
Everyone who has looked at this has reached a conclusion that this was a despicable series of acts by lawyers and police officers.
As the night wrapped, Campbell advises Personius not to drive according to the investigation, even offering to pay for her cab. But she insists that Campbell drive her car, and that's when Fernandez nabbed him. The bar investigation details of text messages and phone calls between Personius, Adams, Diaco, Filthaut, and Fernandez could cost those attorneys if true. Now, this report also alleges that even back in December of 2012, Filthaut called Sergeant Fernandez to report that Campbell was driving drunk. Fernandez sent someone to investigate the claim, but no arrest was made. By the way, the DUI charges against Campbell were eventually dropped.
On May 3rd of 2014, my client Phil Campbell received an unsolicited email from an individual who identified himself as Christopher Personius. In the email, he indicated that he was the ex-husband of Melissa Personius, and he asked Mr. Campbell if he could come into Mr. Campbell's office and meet with him. We reported this contact to the FBI. Mr. Campbell had, up to this point, had never met Mr. Personius. On May 6th of 2014, at the direction of the FBI, a meeting took place between Mr. Personius and Mr. Campbell. The meeting took place in an office in downtown Tampa. The special agents from the FBI were not present in the meeting, but were in the vicinity of the meeting. The meeting was electronically monitored by the FBI. During the meeting, Mr. Personius spoke to Mr. Campbell about certain matters and then produced a cell phone and proceeded to play a recording of a conversation that he had had with Melissa Personius. The meeting concluded. Mr. Personius left. Special agents of the FBI then met immediately with Mr. Campbell, who provided the cell phone to the FBI. I'm not going to get into detail as to what occurred between Mr. Personius and Mr. Campbell when they met. But I clearly anticipate that next week at the bar trial of the three disgraced lawyers, that these matters will be addressed during the testimony of Mr. Campbell, during the testimony of Christopher Personius, and perhaps in other manners.
Well, a heated day in court as the fallout continues for three Bay Area attorneys accused of a DUI setup surrounding a high-profile shock jock case. A judge says the trial over whether to disbar the attorneys will move forward in May.
I ask, Your Honor, given what's at stake here, the licenses, and given Your Honor's order rejecting those pleas, I simply ask for some additional time.
Actually, we were supposed to begin today,
So that was when it was scheduled. No one had moved to continue it.
Well, we went to a judge. We were working on a settlement, and Your Honor knew we were working on a settlement.
Yes,
Please.
I did.
The lawyer for the attorneys at the center of the issue argued the penalty hearing for the law licenses should be on hold pending a federal investigation. The legal team represented shock jock Bubba the Love Sponge Clem in a libel case with rival DJ Todd Schnitt and are accused of setting up Schnitt's attorney for DUI. Just last week, a judge rejected a plea deal for the attorneys, saying the punishment wasn't harsh enough. The attorney's lawyer plans to appeal today's ruling.
So if we truly want to protect the public and the public wants to find out what's going on, as all you individuals want to, I submit to you that that can only be accomplished by allowing these individuals to testify without threat of some impending investigation.
Today in court, it was no.
I invoke my right to the Fifth.
Then, Stephen Diaco was called to the stand, and it was much of the same.
On advice of counsel, I assert the Fifth.
But there was a change of heart by Robert Adams. He told the judge and Florida Bar Attorney Jody Thompson that he knows if he doesn't take the stand, he could lose his law license, and he didn't want that to happen. He also said he wanted to take responsibility for his role that night and correct what he says are inaccuracies that have been reported.
I do take responsibility, Judge, for my lapse in judgment and not prohibiting Mr. Filthaut from calling Officer Fernandez that night. That's a mistake that I made that evening, and an awful mistake. One of the worst mistakes I've made in my 46 years.
But that's the only thing Adams says he did wrong that night and the days following.
10 News reporter Jenny Dean joins us live now with the testimony we've been waiting to hear. Jenny, what can you tell us?
Well, Dion, Chris Personius has had what's described as a tumultuous relationship with his ex, Melissa Personius. So when she came home the night of January 23rd, 2013, intoxicated, excited, and a little panicked, he decided to get out his cell phone and start recording.
You know, I think they're, to be honest, scumbags. She was instructed to basically set this guy up. That to get Phil Campbell to drink more, to get Phil Campbell to stay where the cop was in place.
Chris Personius says he has all of this on tape. So far, that recording has not been admitted as evidence in court. But during testimony, he described in detail everything Melissa told him that night about how Stephen Diaco, Robert Adams, and Adam Filthaut hatched a plan weeks earlier to set up Phil Campbell at Malio's restaurant and how she helped them finally carry it out.
Robert Adams and Stephen Diaco had instructed them that if they see Phil Campbell at Malio's to call them right away.
Personius maintains he turned over that recording 14 months later because it's the right thing to do, because a man stands up and tells the truth. But on cross-examination, attorney Greg Kehoe questioned those motives, saying it was revenge on Melissa because she was pushing for child support, and got him to admit this.
If she would have just left me alone and let me see my kids, we wouldn't be here right now.
You just said that if everything had been fine between you and Melissa, that you wouldn't be here, right? Is that what you just say that?
I take that back.
Now, Chris Personius did say he was threatened several times by Melissa Personius about his testimony today. He testified that she told him, "Look at what we did to Phil Campbell. Imagine what we can do to you." Now, as far as that recording, if the Bar Council decides to submit it as evidence, the judge says he'll have to have an evidentiary hearing to determine the circumstances surrounding how that was recorded and whether it was done illegally or not, and then decide whether or not to admit it into the trial.
The judges found the three attorneys, Stephen Diaco, Robert Adams, and Adam Filthaut, guilty of conspiring with their paralegal and Tampa Police Sergeant Ray Fernandez to set up opposing counsel Phil Campbell for a DUI arrest. Some of the findings in this case include that the legal team had been covering up or was destroying evidence of their crimes by erasing data on their cell phones. The judge says Diaco and Adams tried gaining an unfair advantage in the shock jock trial by not immediately returning Phil Campbell's briefcase, which they had in their firm's possession after Campbell was arrested for DUI. All three attorneys were also found guilty of fraud, deceit, and dishonesty. Lead defense attorney Greg Kehoe says he will appeal.
I do think we have a very good case for appeal.
In all, Diaco was found guilty of 9 bar violations, Adams 5, and Filthaut 4. Campbell's attorney, John Fitzgibbon, says this ruling should be a warning to all attorneys who even think about breaking the rules.
They engaged in unethical conduct, they got caught, and they're going to be suffering the consequences.
Now, Judge Douglas Baird will next issue his recommendation for punishment, which, as we said before, many believe will be the 5-year disbarment. Then it's passed along to the Florida Supreme Court for final judgment.
The 3 shock jock attorneys caught up in a DUI setup of a rival attorney should never practice law in the state of Florida again. That's the recommendation from a judge today who didn't hold back. Tonight, 10 News reporter Kendra Conlon is digging deeper into the damning decision.
Putting Mr. Campbell in the kind of position that they put him in, so unfair.
High-profile attorney Barry Cohn finds their conduct reprehensible. Judge Douglas Baird cites had this cover-up not been discovered, it could have been Campbell facing disbarment. And the attorneys plotted Campbell's arrest not just once, but 2 months earlier, still pressed on with their plan, calling it a deliberate and malicious effort.
This conduct was so egregious, so irresponsible, so inexcusable, that there has to be a deterrent factor.
Judge Baird says the setup hurt Campbell. Sergeant Fernandez lost his job, and their lies rocked the public's confidence in the legal system. And for that, the 3 attorneys should pay with their license.